Wait, don't go so fast.
What is it?
The fruit vendor has fresh mangoes. Let's get some.
All right, let's go.
Awaken spirits of the market. What magic is this?
You have come, seeker.
The spirits guided me here.
Then listen well.
Thank you for these vegetables, grandmother. You are welcome, my child. They are fresh from the garden. They look wonderful.
In the busy and colorful city of Ower, where the markets sang with the sounds of bargaining voices and the smell of roasted groundnuts floated through the warm air, there lived a woman named Adana, a woman many people admired but quietly envied. Adana lived in a large compound with tall white walls that glowed under the African sun, and inside that compound were polished floors, carved wooden chairs, and curtains so expensive that even the wind seemed careful when passing through them. Her husband, Bako, was a successful trader known across the region, and he loved Adana deeply, often bringing her gifts from distant towns, beads from the north, silk scarves from the coast, and perfumes that smelled like blooming flowers after rain. Their 2 children were bright and well-behaved, the kind elders liked to point at and say, "Those ones will go far." To any stranger looking from the outside, Adana's life looked perfect. But as the elders say, the drum that sounds the loudest in the village may still be empty inside. Adana had a habit that many people noticed but few dared to speak about. She praised herself too much. Everywhere she went she walked like a queen among peasants, lifting her chin high and swinging her hips slowly as if the road itself had been built for her feet. In the market she spoke loudly about the price of her jewelry, the quality of her clothes, and the greatness of her husband's wealth. "Common people wear common things," she would say with a smile that carried both pride and sharpness. "But I, Adana, was born for finer things." The women who sold vegetables would exchange quiet glances when she passed. The old men who sat under the mango tree would shake their heads slowly. Because among the people of Ower there was a saying, "The calabash that floats too proudly on the water may forget the river still controls the current." Yet Adana paid no attention to whispers or warnings. One bright Tuesday morning, when the sun had barely climbed above the rooftops and the market was already waking like a giant stretching its limbs, Adana dressed herself in a beautiful blue wrapper and golden sandals that glittered with every step. She was on her way to buy the finest Ankara fabric in the market because, as she proudly told her children before leaving, "A woman like me cannot wear ordinary cloth." As she walked down the dusty road toward the market, the sound of her sandals clicked confidently against the ground. Birds fluttered across the sky, children chased each other between stalls, and traders shouted prices like drummers calling a rhythm. Everything seemed normal, until Adana noticed something strange. Something so strange that it stopped her mid-step. Her shadow was not beside her. It was not behind her either. Instead, her shadow was walking ahead of her. At first she thought her eyes were playing tricks, the way heat sometimes makes the air dance above the road. She blinked once. Then twice. She rubbed her eyes until they stung. But there it was, her shadow moving confidently ahead, stretching along the dusty ground like a woman who knew exactly where she was going. It did not hesitate, it did not slow down, and it certainly did not wait for her. It walked ahead with purpose, as if the shadow had somewhere important to be and Adana was the one who was late. Adana felt a cold shiver crawl along her spine despite the warmth of the morning sun. What kind of foolishness is this?" she whispered to herself, glancing around to see if anyone else had noticed. The traders nearby continued selling their goods. A goat bleated loudly. A boy ran past carrying a basket of oranges. No one seemed to see what she was seeing. Her heart began beating like a drum at a festival. Carefully, she took a step forward. The shadow stepped forward too, but still remained ahead of her. Another step. The same thing happened. It was as though the shadow had broken the ancient rule that binds every person to their reflection on the earth. And then, to Adana's growing horror, the shadow reached the entrance of the market, and continued walking inside without her. Adana stood frozen on the dusty road for several heartbeats, her mouth slightly open as if the wind had stolen her words, while her shadow slipped ahead of her into the noisy entrance of the market like a person who belonged there more than she did. The sounds of the marketplace continued without pause, the clatter of metal bowls, the laughter of women selling peppers, the distant cry of a man advertising fresh fish, but to Adana everything suddenly felt distant and strange, like a dream she had accidentally stepped into. Slowly, with hesitant steps that were very different from the confident walk she had earlier, she followed the path toward the market entrance. Her mind raced with questions that chased each other like frightened chickens. How could a shadow walk alone? Had some spirit decided to play a trick on her? Or worse, had something left her body without permission? In the village where she grew up, elders often warned children about mysterious things that lived in the unseen world, spirits that watched humans the way humans watched ants, but Adana had always laughed at those stories. She believed wealth and beauty protected her from the strange troubles that ordinary people feared. Yet as she stepped inside the busy market square, her heart began pounding louder than the wooden drums played during harvest festivals. There, moving between the crowded stalls and piles of colorful fabrics, was her shadow. It stretched along the ground exactly as a shadow should, but it moved freely, gliding past baskets of tomatoes and stacks of dried cassava as if it had its own business to attend to. Adana's breath caught in her throat. "This cannot be happening," she murmured, wiping her forehead even though the morning breeze was cool. Just then Mama Goy, the old woman who owned the biggest spice shop in the market, noticed Adana standing stiffly near the entrance. Mama Goy had eyes that missed very little in Ower. People often joked that if a mosquito blinked its eyes in the market, Mama Goy would be the first to report it. "Adana," she called with a wide grin that showed the gap between her front teeth. "What is wrong with you this morning? You look like someone who has swallowed a bitter cola nut without chewing." Adana forced a laugh, though it sounded weak even to her own ears. "Nothing, Mama Goy, nothing at all. I just thought I saw something strange." The old woman chuckled and shook her head. "In the market, my daughter, strange things walk beside ordinary things every day. If you stare too long, you will start seeing spirits buying tomatoes." Adana nodded quickly, pretending to be amused, but her eyes secretly searched the ground for the wandering shadow. And then she saw it again, sliding calmly toward the fabric stalls where the finest Ankara cloth was sold. But this time something even stranger happened. The shadow stopped beside a stall, stretched upward along the wooden table, and lifted its arm as if touching the fabrics. Adana gasped quietly. Shadows were not supposed to choose things. They were not supposed to reach, inspect, or decide. Yet there it was, moving with intention. At that moment a young fabric seller named Kofi noticed Adana staring at the ground with wide eyes. "Madam Adana," he said politely, bowing his head slightly. "Are you looking for something you dropped?" She hesitated, unsure whether she should tell the truth. What would they say if she told them her shadow had walked away from her body? They would laugh. Or worse, they would think she had lost her mind. So she quickly shook her head and forced another smile. "No, nothing. I was just admiring the patterns on your fabrics." Kofi brightened immediately and began pulling out rolls of colorful cloth. But Adana barely looked at them. Her eyes followed the restless movement of her shadow, which had now begun drifting deeper into the market like a curious traveler exploring a new town. Fear slowly wrapped itself around her chest. If a shadow could leave its owner once, what would stop it from leaving forever? And if a person lost their shadow completely, what part of their soul might disappear with it? The elders often said that pride is like a tall tree that invites lightning during a storm. As Adana watched her shadow wander farther away between the crowded stalls, she felt for the first time that perhaps the storm had finally found her. Adana's fear grew heavier with every step she took through the crowded market as she followed the strange path of her wandering shadow, which now moved confidently between stalls like a silent traveler who knew exactly where it was going. The colorful chaos of the marketplace surrounded her, women laughing as they measured grains, men arguing over goat prices, children weaving between baskets of oranges, but Adana barely heard any of it because her eyes remained fixed on the thin dark shape gliding across the dusty ground ahead of her. The shadow finally stopped near the old baobab tree that stood at the center of the market square, a tree so ancient that elders said it had witnessed the births and deaths of many generations. The wide trunk cast a cool circle of shade where traders sometimes rested during the hottest hours of the day, but now the place was strangely empty, as if the air itself had decided to step aside. Adana approached slowly, her golden sandals suddenly sounding far too loud against the earth. Her heart beat wildly in her chest, and for the first time in many years the proud woman of Oer felt small and uncertain. The shadow lay stretched across the ground in front of the baobab tree, longer now because the sun had climbed higher in the sky. For several moments nothing happened. Adana swallowed nervously and whispered, "Enough of this foolishness, come back where you belong." The shadow did not move. A warm breeze rustled the leaves above her, and somewhere nearby a chicken clucked loudly. Adana stepped closer. "Do you hear me?" she muttered, her voice shaking slightly. "You are mine. You cannot simply walk away." Then something happened that made the blood drain from her face. The shadow slowly rose from the ground, lifting upward along the trunk of the baobab tree like dark smoke climbing toward the sky. It formed the shape of a woman, her shape, but somehow older, calmer, and strangely powerful. And then the shadow spoke. "Adana." The voice was soft yet deep, echoing slightly like sound bouncing inside a hollow drum. Adana stumbled backward in terror. "Spirits protect me," she gasped. "What evil thing is this?" The shadow did not laugh or shout. Instead, it remained still against the tree trunk, its shape gently shifting like ripples in water. "I am not evil," the shadow replied. "I am you." Adana shook her head wildly. "No, no, this is witchcraft. Shadows do not speak." The shadow's voice remained calm. "They do not speak when their owners listen. But you, Adana, stopped listening long ago." The words struck her like small stones thrown at her pride. She clenched her fists. "What nonsense are you saying?" The shadow stretched slightly along the bark of the baobab tree. "For many years I walked quietly beside you," it said. "I watched you grow proud of things that the wind can take away in a single season: wealth, beauty, praise from strangers. You believed those things made you greater than others." Adana's face hardened. "And why should I not be proud? I worked for what I have." The shadow's form flickered gently. "Did you build the house alone? Did you create the sun that lights your path? Did you plant the soil that grows the food you eat?" Adana hesitated, but her stubborn pride refused to surrender. "Those things still belong to me," she insisted. "People respect me." The shadow slowly slid down from the tree and stretched across the ground again, but this time it faced her like a teacher facing a student. "Respect built on pride is like a clay pot balanced on a thin stick," it said quietly. "Sooner or later it falls." Adana's breathing grew heavier. "Why are you telling me these things?" she demanded. "Because," the shadow replied, "I grew tired of walking behind a woman who had forgotten the ground beneath her feet." The words echoed in the silent circle around the baobab tree. Adana felt a strange mixture of anger and fear twisting inside her chest. "You belong to me," she said again, though this time her voice sounded weaker. "Then prove you deserve me," the shadow answered calmly. And with those mysterious words, it began moving away again, slipping across the dusty earth toward the far end of the market where the poorest traders sat with their small baskets of vegetables. Adana stared after it, realizing with growing dread that the strange journey was far from over, and whatever lesson awaited her at the end might change her life forever. Adana stood for a long moment beneath the old baobab tree, her chest rising and falling quickly as she watched her shadow glide across the dusty ground toward the far end of the market, the part she rarely ever visited. That corner of Oer's market was different from the colorful center filled with bright fabrics and loud traders. It was quieter, poorer, and filled with people who sold only small baskets of vegetables, worn-out tools, or handmade items that barely earned them enough to survive the day. In the past, Adana would pass that area with her head turned slightly away, as if the struggles of those people were unpleasant smells she preferred not to breathe in. But now her own shadow was heading directly there, and something deep inside her told her she had no choice but to follow. Each step felt heavier than the last as she walked across the market square, weaving past stalls and curious glances from villagers who noticed the once proud woman moving with unusual hesitation. The sun had climbed high, casting sharp lines of light across the ground, and Adana could clearly see her shadow stretching ahead of her again, gliding toward a small group of traders sitting quietly on worn mats. Among them was an elderly woman with tired eyes selling only 3 small piles of okra. Her clothes were faded from years of washing, and the wrinkles on her face were like the lines of a map showing a life filled with hard journeys. Adana recognized her faintly. Her name was Nala, a widow who had lived in the village for many years, but Adana had never spoken to her before. The shadow stopped directly in front of Nala's mat. It stretched across the ground until it touched the edge of the small okra piles, as if pointing toward them. Adana slowed her steps and approached carefully, feeling the eyes of several nearby traders watching her with curiosity. Nala looked up and smiled gently despite the weariness in her face. "Good afternoon, my daughter," she said kindly. "Would you like to buy some okra today?" Her voice was soft but hopeful. In the past Adana might have waved her hand dismissively or pretended not to hear, but now she hesitated. Her shadow remained still beside the old woman's vegetables as if waiting for something. Adana swallowed and glanced around awkwardly. "How much, for the okra?" she asked quietly. Nala brightened immediately. "Only a few coins, my daughter. My grandson has been sick, and I hope to buy medicine before the sun sets." The words struck Adana unexpectedly. She stared down at the small piles of vegetables that suddenly seemed far more valuable than the expensive fabrics she had come to buy earlier. Her shadow slowly shifted across the ground, forming a shape beside the old woman's mat that looked almost like a hand reaching out. The silent message was clear. For a moment Adana's old pride tried to rise again. A voice in her mind whispered that people were watching her, that a woman of her status should not kneel in the dusty corner of the market bargaining over simple vegetables. But another feeling, one she had not listened to in a long time, pushed gently against that pride. Without another word she knelt down beside Nala and reached into the small purse tied at her waist. Instead of pulling out a few coins, she placed a much larger amount into the old woman's hands. Nala's eyes widened with surprise. "My daughter, this is too much," she said quickly. Adana shook her head slowly. "No," she replied in a quieter voice than anyone in the market had ever heard from her before. "Today it is enough." The old woman's eyes filled with grateful tears as she thanked her again and again. Around them the nearby traders watched silently, whispering among themselves in confusion because this was not the proud Adana they were used to seeing. As Adana stood up, she noticed something strange again. Her shadow had moved closer to her feet. It was no longer far ahead like a stranger walking away. Instead it rested calmly beside her, touching her heels like a companion who had returned from a long journey. A warm breeze passed through the market square, and for the first time that day Adana felt the tight knot in her chest loosen slightly. Yet she sensed that the lesson was not fully finished. The shadow had returned closer, yes, but it had not completely rejoined her. And deep inside, Adana understood that the final step of this strange journey would decide whether her shadow would remain with her forever, or leave her life for good. Adana remained standing in the quiet corner of the market for a long moment after helping the old woman, feeling the warm wind brush softly across her face while the sounds of the marketplace slowly returned around her like waves coming back to the shore. Traders resumed their bargaining, children laughed again, and somewhere a drum began beating in the distance, yet something inside Adana had changed. The proud woman who had walked into the market earlier that morning with her chin lifted high and her heart full of vanity now felt strangely different, as if the heavy crown of pride she had been wearing for years had finally slipped from her head. She looked down at the ground beside her feet where her shadow rested quietly, darker and calmer than before, but still not fully joined with her body. It moved when she moved, yet it remained slightly separated, as though it was still deciding whether she had truly learned the lesson it had tried to teach her. Adana slowly walked away from the poor corner of the market, not with the proud swinging steps she had once loved, but with careful and thoughtful strides. As she passed the colorful stalls of fabric and spices, several villagers noticed the change in her behavior. Mama Goy, the sharp-eyed spice seller, watched her closely from behind her wooden table piled with red peppers and dried herbs. The old woman murmured to herself. The river must have spoken to that one today. Adana approached Mama Goy's stall and paused. In the past she would have immediately begun bragging about the expensive cloth she planned to buy, but today she simply greeted the old woman respectfully. "Good afternoon, Mama Goy." The spice seller raised her eyebrows with mild surprise, then smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, my daughter. The market has been busy today. Did you find what you were looking for?" Adana looked down briefly before answering. "Yes, though not the thing I expected." Mama Goy chuckled softly, not fully understanding the meaning behind the words, but sensing that something important had taken place. Adana continued walking until she reached the entrance of the market again, the same place where her strange morning had begun. She stopped there and took a slow breath. The dusty road stretched out before her, glowing under the afternoon sun, and the breeze carried the distant scent of roasted maize. For a moment she closed her eyes and thought about the way she had treated people for so many years, the proud words, the dismissive looks, the way she had believed wealth made her better than those around her. A quiet feeling of regret filled her chest, but it was not the painful kind that crushes the heart. Instead, it felt like the first drop of rain after a long dry season, promising that something new could grow if she allowed it. When Adana opened her eyes again, she looked down at the ground beside her feet. Her shadow had finally moved closer, touching her heels completely now, following her movements exactly as it once had long ago. For a moment it stretched slightly in the sunlight, then slowly merged perfectly with her body again, returning to its rightful place like a loyal companion who had finished guiding its owner back onto the right path. Adana smiled softly, feeling relief wash through her like cool water. She understood now that the shadow had never truly wanted to abandon her, it had only stepped away so she could see herself clearly for the first time. From that day forward the people of Ower noticed a new Adana walking through their streets. She still lived in the large house, and her husband still loved her deeply, but she no longer walked like the road belonged only to her. She greeted traders kindly, helped those who struggled, and listened when elders spoke their wisdom. In time the villagers began telling the strange story of the day Adana's shadow walked away from her in the market. Parents shared it with their children during quiet evenings, and elders repeated it under the shade of the baobab tree as a reminder that pride can quietly steal a person's true self if they are not careful. And whenever the story was told, the elders always ended it with the same simple lesson: a person may own many things in life, but the moment pride grows too tall, even their own shadow may refuse to walk beside them.